my lady Shanita. There are about a million things that I could say about this lady, but aside from everything that's in her bio and everything that we've put up on the website about her, here is one thing that I particularly am honored to share. She is a teacher and a sharer of information, wisdom, and practical to dos. It's one of the things I like most about her. Miss Shanita, you have the floor.
Well, thank you so much. It is my distinct honor and pleasure to be here today on a conscious leadership as the banner for this wonderful summit is entitled. And it is this week marks National Popcorn Week. National Popcorn Day was earlier this week, in case y'all don't know. And for those of us in the Chicagoland area, if you've not had Garrett's popcorn, I must call you out on that and say that that is something that is near and dear to my heart. So I'm very pleased not only to be at the Conscious Leadership Summit, but also because I've had my share of popcorn. As was shared with you, I am bringing a slightly different perspective to today's conversation. And again, it's my privilege to do so. I put a notice out when I announced this on LinkedIn earlier today that for my session, I suggested you bring your own glass of lemonade or iced tea or whatever your libation of choice is, because what I'm going to do is invite you to join me on the front porch. I call this front porch leadership tactics, and I'm tying it into project management from the perspective of my great grandmother, great grand, who received that name because she was both great and grand in her demeanor and in her uh, understanding of the world with her third grade education and what she taught me from the rocking chair on her front porch. And so, what I was asked to do today, and I'm delighted to do, is make a correlation between how both storytelling, leadership tactics, and basically homespun wit can be woven into a tapestry that can assist you in both the project management realm, in the outside world, and whatever capacities that you see fit to employ it. So I have a limited amount of time with you today, so I'm going to jump right in, but I'm going to encourage a couple of things. Please, in the chat, give me your information if you'd like to follow up with me. I'll have mine at the end. Ask questions also in the chat, and I will pay attention to those and try to intersperse them in the talk with you today. And lastly, please know that this is something that I am sharing from time-tested tenets that I've been able to apply in both a leadership praxis as well as in a project management praxis. But I encourage the thoughts and thinking that you all have that you may be able to suggest to me that you may be able to find directly applicable in whatever aspects of your worlds that you live in. Okay. So this is great grand, Lucille Jones. And she was a woman who raised 8 children, but also in the process of doing that, as I said a moment ago, was able to inspire a generation of leaders behind her when she passed. She left us in 1987. And when she left us, as we convened in her small wooden frame home and consumed cold chicken and warm Kool-Aid, we swapped stories about this woman. And because we were telling and the retelling of her life to one another, myself at the age of 16 was starting to incorporate those things into my thinking and really starting to think about what I didn't know how to frame at that time, which I now know to be basic project management skills. It's interesting because it's how you can take nuggets of things from everyday life, which I'm going to be sharing with you all today, and directly apply them in so many ways beyond the obvious ways in which we may see them as being applicable. I recently applied to do a TEDx presentation on climate change, for example. And when I was working on the application, and some of you may know Amy Sagami, and she's a stickler for detail, and I was working on my application, and I remember when we were both first approached about it, I said to her, well, of course I can talk about climate change with Great Grand, because Great Grand was the type of woman who taught me about the plant ecosystem while she was stirring a pot of greens. She taught me about understanding how to listen for the sounds of thunder by going outside, licking her finger and holding it up to the sky. So there were some basic things that this woman was doing on a macro level that if you looked at her, you would say, not sure if she really knows all that fancy stuff, because she basically had a house dress on and her hair in plaits. She wasn't suited and booted, as we like to call it. But where she was suited and booted is in her leadership strategic tactics. And so that is what I have written about in a lot of different ways. I have a book about it that I have here that is called Leading from the Heart. I write about her ad nauseum. And so now today, the front porch leadership tenet, which I am also writing about and doing presentations on, is what I'm now going to share with you. So let's tie it into what I'm calling the storytelling practice. So this is what Great Grand did. She told stories. And so stories in and of themselves and project management go together like peanut butter and jelly, or because if you have your lemonade or iced tea or whatever your libation is, ice and Kool-Aid. Okay, so it's a communications tool that can enhance a project manager's effectiveness. Here's how. Stories are bridgers. They are bridgers of several things. They are the precipice of what the vision and mission is of an organization. I don't think it has to be said to this group that in order to get the buy-in needed for any project to move forward, there has to be some momentum set. The leader sets the momentum through a variety of tools in their toolkit, but one of the most tried and true, but unfortunately oft overlooked, is the one related to stories. Because if you're able to connect with the heart, as I just heard in our last speaker's presentation, and I was so pleased to hear that, and Kimi said this, it's the head count. It's the heart count, excuse me, not the head count. We tend to always look or often look at numerical numbers or numerical, that's redundant, numerical numbers. We look at numerical metrics to measure success. And while there's some merit in that, the true growth sometimes cannot be intellectualized that way. You can't always intellectualize what has moved the needle in a practice or in a mission-driven accomplishment. And so when you start looking at storytelling as a tool, you start to begin to understand that when you have the buy-in of your team, when you're leading your team from a place in which you are giving them the aspired action steps needed to take, what can be done can then be quantified, and it's measurable because you can see the vast improvement. Last thing I'll say on this particular slide is when you look at storytelling, though, it shouldn't be seen as an umbrella, one size fits all kind of measurement or tool. What I have found, because it's a communication tool, it's on a continuum. That means that you have to hone it. Depending on your audiences, you're going to have to determine what to include and what not to include. Some of it is on a need-to-know basis, right? So not all stories are told the same way, with the same emphasis on the same points to the same audiences. But once you have gotten that kind of skill, you've greased that pan, as grandmom, as great grand would do, then you are going to understand and be able to navigate that accordingly. For those fact-based listeners, type A personalities, I'm going to say this. So I'm in a home of engineers. My husband is an architecture major. He was in college where we met. My oldest son is a civil engineering major. My now young man, 24-year-old. My youngest 20-year-old son is a business major. So I get the need to not only talk about the EQ of things, the emotional quotient, but the other side of the coin. So here's the slide that I created to address that, which is that when you use leadership and storytelling, apply it to project management, it's the strategic sequencing of facts and emotions. So again, that marriage. So you're taking the yin and the yang, you're taking the solid factual-based information and you're tying it into something that is going to resonate. In my classes, as you heard in my introduction, I'm a 22-year academician. So I've been a professor for 22 years. Y'all, I have to say that to myself to remember it's been that long. But in my classes, what I say to my students is, it's the 80-20 principle. And we talk about that in a variety of different contexts. But for this presentation, I'm going to say that the 80-20 principle applies to that 80% of what's going to connect with your team is going to be based on the emotional stuff. I know y'all don't want to hear that. I know you're not listening to Shanita Akintonde, but trust me, that is true. 20% of it will be based on the fact-based. It's not that you're coming at it with a fictionalized version of what you are doing and you're not feeding incorrect information or data. I'm talking about the project management aspect of leading the team and what's going to motivate them to move forward. So when we think about it, in our companies, in our individual organizations, for those who are entrepreneurs, if you're a speaker, if you're a seeker, stories are all around us. People tell them to us, whether we want to hear them or not. I'm telling you on Zoom, something about Zoom, and people sometimes when they get the microphone on here or the cameras on them in the little square rectangular box, they talk on and on and on. So we're hearing everybody's business, right? We know more than we may want to about some folks, but stories are being told. But in an environmental sense, the stars are telling us stories. The trees are telling us stories. The environment is telling us stories. Now, I have an exercise I usually do at this portion of the presentation, but seeing as though I'm looking at the screen here and I'm not seeing a lot of windows on, thank you, Cynthia Anderson, but I'm not seeing a lot of other folks, so I'm not going to do this particular exercise because it does require some face-to-face time. But I will say that, think about this. What is your personal story? And I will share one aspect of the exercise that I was going to do with you now, which is another one that I do in my classes. I encourage you to do this with your teams. And that is what I call the origin story. Companies should do this as well. So I'm going to put this on a two-pronged request. You yourselves should do this, your team should do it, and then your organization should take a step back and think about it and ask, what is our origin story? And that goes into, what are you trying to do? When are you trying to do it? And who is the audience you're trying to reach in that process? In this case, it is saying that it's a story that you write about, which can be related to a particular event in your life that made you feel a particular kind of way. When you were trying to do it, when you were telling a story, you want your audiences to have the same feeling. Now, for organizations, this can be tied into your mission statement. This can be tied into a vision statement. But what I encourage you to consider doing as project management leaders is read your vision statements to your teams on a pretty regular basis. I've been in organizations where I've led teams where I've started any meeting that I was going to conduct with my team. And I definitely considered sometimes just ending the meeting by revisiting and reading aloud our mission statement or our vision statement. Sometimes I'd have us do it as a group. The reason for that, especially if it's short now, you can't do this if this is a dissertation version of something. It has to be a few lines, maybe, a paragraph. But the reason I do it is because what I found is something in that process, even if it's just from a ritualistic perspective, creates that buy-in and that necessary connection to what our story is and what our core meaning and missions are. And so when you're doing that as a leader, you're walking the walk, you're talking the talk, and you're also demonstrating to your team in a very visceral way that you yourself should be committed to what it is you're saying that you're trying to do as well. And so this idea of an origin story, some people do it on vision boards. Some people do it through a system of measurements, as I mentioned, a brainstorming meeting with their team. But after this conscious leadership conference, particularly in 2021, where a lot of organizations have had to go back and revisit the way they did business, the way they're doing business, right? We're not doing it in the same ways anymore. We can't because we were forced to do things differently. So, just think about that and how it needs to have some flexibility. And that's the beauty of stories. They can be adapted, they can be shifted as need be. Okay. Okay. One of the tools again here, and I'm believing you all are going to get these slides, is to prompt you. The Once upon a time version of your story. I like this one because all stories begin with once upon a time, or every day, one day, because of that, until finally. So these are some prompts to get you to write it. Remember, I said it's not long. If you read Herman Melville's Moby Dick, it's not the Moby Dick version of a story. We just want the cliff notes, okay? But when you have that, that is something that you could put on a poster. You can have it on a screen share or something that your team can see. Make buttons, put it on the Zoom virtual background, but do something that reinforces it so that people see it. Why you must tell the story I mentioned. What is the belief that is burning within you that you need to feed off of? And what is your greater purpose? Let me pause on that last one. I think the whole mission and vision of today, and I'm hoping you all have gotten that from the previous speakers and that you're getting them from me now. And that is, this is bigger than all of us. This summit that was put together and the title of Conscious Leadership is because this is not about, it's not optional, as our wonderful industrious leader who put this together is saying to us. This ain't optional. The idea of being conscious and being intentional and being purposeful and being mission driven is not optional, whether we want it to be or not. So that is why the tools, such as I'm sharing with you now from the speaker perspective, provide with so much information that I'm hoping will help you frame it and share it with others. Share it wide, share it far. So for my chart lovers, because again, Kimi told me, y'all are project management people, y'all like bars and graphs and charts and stuff. So I put one in here for you. It's really a visual. It reiterates what I'm saying, but for those folks who are needing to see it in graph form, it's a way to kind of follow it. It's a map. At the top, you see, I'm saying tell it as often as you can. I've reiterated that a few times. I think you understand it. If there are numbers, memorize those. If you're telling the story, seek out work that will result in a good story. Use your images, speak at events, write about it. So in other words, do some things that are going to reinforce it in multiple ways. You're verbally saying it, but you're also showing it. This whole process is like unwrapping a gift. And we all know how we feel when someone presents us with a present. You look at the box, you look at the wrapping, you look at the bow. Or maybe that's just me, Bobby. You look like you may be okay, but I like to get gifts from people, right? And so it's the anticipation of it. And so when you're thinking about this from a project management perspective, you should approach this from a build-up ideation. Think about how you get your team to anticipate what's coming next. No one wants to work in an environment in which everything is just dull and boring and the same old put the peg in the hole and continue to put the peg in the hole. Now, I'm not dissing anyone who's done that work. I worked in a factory when I graduated from high school for one summer so I could pay for college. Much respect to people who do that kind of work. It's not for the kid. The belt came down and I was supposed to drop the shampoo bottles into the box. I thought simple enough. I felt like Lucille Ball. It was all over the place and it was all messed up and I just totally didn't do that well. But in your everyday lives, if that's not of interest to you to be the person that's dropping the shampoo in the box or this peg in the hole, then you should think about it from a storytelling perspective, which means you have a beginning, middle, and end that your employees, your teams, your people can relate to and look forward to and anticipate. And so when you approach getting them motivated on your projects, then think about it in those three boxes. This is the beginning of it, which is where I'm going to present it all nicely wrapped. The middle is the unveiling of it. And at the end, it's going to be the conclusion, which hopefully will have an outstanding result, whatever your measurements, again, that you put in place are that you're trying to achieve. The reason why this works from a concrete example perspective is because brands, which is my background, that's what I teach, branding and communication, understand this. The brands that I've represented, which range from McDonald's to Coca-Cola and Sprite, all at their very core understand that 80-20 principle that I mentioned earlier, that the way they get people to buy more McDonald's hamburgers or drink more Coca-Cola or use Google to the point that it's now a verb. Google has manifested our vocabulary where we say Google it because it's now a verb. That is some bad branding. That's a bad business when you take over the world that way. So I'm going to show you an example of a video that I believe demonstrates what I'm saying about the power of story and something that I call the sizzle. I do another presentation called Selling the Sizzle, in which I talk about how storytelling and branding and communication and leadership tactics, when all woven together, create a sizzle, which I'll talk about more in a minute. But my wonderful producer is going to help me with showing this video, number one, if we can, which is Google, and it's showing how Google demonstrates this. So pay attention, please.
Nous entamons un très bon reconnaissance à l'aéroport Charles de Gaulle. Le commandant est disponible.
Hello. Bonjour.
Très très mignon. Alors?
Le commandant et toute son équipe espèrent que vous avez passé un agréable moment.
So if that doesn't tug on your heartstrings, wonderful participants, then I don't know if you have a conscience. No, but I think that the Google ad demonstrates how a product can take something with no words, right? That ad didn't have any words. It just showed the typing process, yet it was able to communicate a very clear message, right? And so that is what I'm also wanting you to understand, that it's not about being loud always or being aggressive or feeling a need to be verbose in a traditional way. It's about how you're able to connect to the core audiences in the storytelling capacity, to use it as one of the tools as needed that can reinforce what we as project managers do. And so I am going to pause now, look at the chat. I'm checking the time to see how we're doing. I had a few more slides, but I will defer to my timekeeper here. See if there are any general comments or questions that you all have now, or if not, I will share my last few
You're doing
slides.
just fine, sweetie.
Okay, good. Any questions from anyone so far or comments?
I have a comment.
Yes, Bobby.
Yeah, Shanita, actually, this, thank you for sharing, by the way, but this principle really is actually, believe it or not, still also used in Scrum in trying to develop a customer journey and how the customer experiences as the customer moves through, for example, using a product line, for example. So you're just from, not just, but thank you for reminding us on using this powerful tool to build mission statements and project goals and objectives, but to follow the customer experience and map the customer journey as the customer goes through the spectrum of that journey.
Yes, thank you for that, Bobby, because that also reminds me of an important point, that this isn't about us as the leader. It's always about the others. And so that is why, to Bobby's point, this information it correlates to the experience that the customer is having. It correlates to the experience our team members are having. There's a book called Leaders Eat Last, because it's not about, us being in front of the line. It's about us being behind the line and pushing that line forward. And I think that gets missed sometimes in the leadership process, that people think that you're in front always, forging the charge, but actually, no, you are the force behind the scenes. I call it the Spanx under the dress, but that may not be the most politically correct way of saying that. That's my 2 cents. So I just have a few more slides, and then I will open it up again to questions. I mentioned the gift. It's a gift because it's coming with sincerity, or when it is coming from a sincere, authentic place. Authenticity rules the day. People can suss out when you're not genuine, when you're inauthentic, when you're doing it, as we mentioned a moment ago, for self-aggrandizement, for self-promotion, for something that is not for the team. But when you are doing the opposite and doing it consciously, then it is a gift. And it's something that is going to, as I said at the beginning, people are going to be eager to open. They're going to want to wear it and be proud and tell others. So this becomes a ripple effect. As a leader, it's not our job to charge the entire team, right? If you get one or two solid ambassadors, then they will then go ahead and spread the good news to the others, and that will help. So just keep those things in mind too. It actually works to our benefit when we do this well, because it lessens our work in the long term. The major takeaway is that, like a precious gift, carefully stowed away, stories should be rewrapped, as I said earlier. Determine when and how to use them, how to put them out, when to pull up, when to go in deeper, and then that will always evoke some kind of action. Don't be ordinary, be extraordinary. This is from our esteemed leader, Kimi. You know, this is something important because we are not ordinary folk. We're extraordinary to be on a Friday afternoon on Zoom listening to a summit about conscious leadership, right? So that already tells me this is an extraordinary group. So keep that going. Last four, be believable, be consistent, be relevant, be above. These are things that Great Grand taught me. She didn't say it in these exact words. Just so you all know, my great grandmother was not a wordsy woman. She didn't say a lot actually at all. As a matter of fact, she never even told me she loved me. She didn't use those words, but it was in a look. It was in a way that she would pass me a plate full of greens and cornbread. And back then they ate something called ham hocks. That showed me that she loved me. That showed me these tenets that I have on the screen. So as a leader, you determine your style and what works best for you. But at the end of the day, being believable, being consistent, being relevant, being above is what's going to propel you forward. So I've shared some resources with the group that you can access when you get this presentation. I mentioned at the beginning that I'm a writer. So in addition to writing the contributions to the book chapters, I've also have some articles I write for the Chicago Defender and the Chicago Tribune. So I've included a few links. In addition, there's a wonderful presentation by a gentleman on the pearls of indifference. He's a Holocaust survivor, and I just like including that from a storytelling perspective. It's a powerful story, and I just like you to look at it because that gives you some ideas of the power of stories to move nations, if the need be. A couple of articles specifically related to project management and storytelling. Yes, y'all, there are articles out there. I didn't write them. I should have, but so you know I'm not making this stuff up. It is literally called Storytelling and Project Management. I kid you not. Check that out. It's a very good one. And guess where it was written, y'all? It was in Forbes. So you know this is good stuff if Forbes has an article on it. I wrote a couple of others, and then there's Leadership and Storytelling, which is another piece that is there. Actually, that one's in Forbes, and the other one's in another business magazine. One of my colleagues on the call, I'm glad to see she joined me, Mandy Shaw. I did a workshop. I'm going to pick this up again in the spring. If you like more on this stuff I'm talking about today, I call it On the Front Porch Storytelling Sessions. They're free and I do them. So if you're interested, just hit me up in the chat. You can be added to my mailing list and you can get more information. And last but not least, this is how you contact me. On LinkedIn, Professor Shanita Akintonde. My phone number, email, all that jazz is there. So again, thank you so much. And I'm going to stop the share once I give you a moment to take a photo of that or jot down my info. And then I will open it up for any questions or comments from any of you who are participating today.
Definite screenshot.
Got it. All right. So thank you. Again, my pleasure. So questions, any others, comments, or anything else?
There is a question in the chat. I can read it off for you.
Thank you.
1 second. There we go. It is, how do we know what touches people on an emotional level? Would it be through research and testing?
That is a great question. So there are a couple of ways. You know, the cool thing about 2021 from a marketing perspective is that we can collect analytics from what I call a variety of tops. The laptops people are using, their desktop computers, the countertops, right? So there's a plethora of information that exists down to the granular aspect of whether someone's a tea drinker or, again, lemonade drinker. But in addition to the research, because sometimes those things are not always true, studies have shown that, for example, if a house cleaning product goes to a woman's house and says, we're going to come and see how you use this cleaning product in your real space so we understand how to go back and, you know, modify it. What do they do first before the cleaning people come to their house? They clean up their house. So it ain't going to get a true, accurate data, if you understand what I'm saying. So what I always say is the way to really understand how to tap into people is ask them, and ask them in a way that they know in responding to you directly that they can trust you and that they will be more likely to give you the real response. And from there, from listening to them directly, you can go about moving accordingly and not assuming. So I think data has its place and research has its place, but just understanding that is sometimes that data can be flawed. Okay, good question. Thank you. Any others?
I did get a text from somebody who had to leave just a moment ago, and the question was, did the framework that you come up with, is that just to illustrate a point, or is that to influence people to move from a point?
Oh, that's another good question. I think it's both. I think through illustration, which is needed, particularly depending on the type of learner or receiver of information some people are, the illustrative aspect of it is important. But I also think from a leadership perspective, we always want to be moving, because if you're not moving, in my opinion, you're going backward, because standing still is not doing anything. So the goal is to always get people to move. And so, yes, I think it would be both, if that answers that.
It does. So where do you put the call to action? That's my question, building on top of that one.
Oh, very good. And I did not say that. The call to action is, you know, traditionally in advertising, we put it at the end of a spot. So at the end, and I tell my students this, you know, never leave someone hanging. You give them the number to call, the 1-800 or the website to go to, right? Or the click here, and don't make them have to work for it. Make it easy. For us, I think the call to action is going to be tiered. Because depending on the nature of the project, depending on the timing, depending on the urgency and all of that, you can have a few call to actions, short-term and long-term call to actions. But at the end of the day, I think that is something that you put in that vision statement that I mentioned at the beginning, or the vision statement when you are setting the frame. You make it very clear that this is what we're doing and this is why we're doing it. And then in the process, the how we're doing it comes through the stories that you're going to be giving them.
Ah, okay. Because it strikes me as both art and science, which probably sounds familiar because that's frequently how people have described project management is part art and part science. So the question that Mandy had asked you about, you know, how to tell if something's going to land also speaks to that a little bit.
Yeah. And again, it ebbs and flows, because like me, on one day, you asked me, you know, I really like, I'll use this analogy. As a kid, I hated beets. Like if you brought a beet near me, I would like look at you like, what the heck? Now, guess what? I love beets. I love them for some reason, right? And so that is really weird. I'm the same person. So we ebb and flow. So what may connect or be something that people are resonating with can change. And so that's why frequent check-ins, or litmus tests, as I call them, are also needed, because for circumstances, life changes, company, external factors can influence that.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments? Bob mentioned that the points will definitely make it easier. The framework is so much easier. And I'm with you on the gift metaphor. Happy popcorn day. I did not know
Happy
that.
popcorn day, right? Happy
I
popcorn
am
day.
staring at my microwave right now, trying to will it to start popping popcorn.
Yeah, I
hope
think
you're
I'll make
able
some
to
when I'm off the call.
I know. I hope you're able to stay for just a little bit at least,
Of
Ms.
course.
Shanita, but
Of
I
course.
also thank you so much.
Oh, thank
Ladies,
you.